So you want to buy a freeze dryer. Good for you. Where are you going to put it? As with all things, location, location, location. So what this video hopes to do is we're going to explore the three locations of a freeze dryer. One is physical location, electrical location, and noise and vibration location. The three most popular places for a freeze dryer are the garage, the kitchen, and the basement. 9 months out of the year, my freeze dryer is in my garage. The garage is a great place to put it, as it has a concrete floor that absorbs a lot of the vibration and a dedicated outlet. But 3 months out of the year, my garage reaches a temperature of 85 degrees, and that's the same temperature limit where the high heat warning on your freeze dryer will pop up. I always thought the kitchen would be a great place to have a freeze dryer, but I only have an 18-inch clearance between the counter and the bottom of the cabinets. And a freeze dryer is going to be 29 inches tall. So can't be on the counter. So what about bars, islands, and peninsulas? The only problem there is that freeze dryers can weigh anywhere from 166 to 188 pounds. And if you have any type of a countertop that could crack under the weight with the vibration, that could be a real big problem. Well, the basement wasn't a possibility for me because I had some children who kind of like moved back in with me, and there's absolutely no room in the basement. One benefit with putting a freeze dryer in a basement is because they're mostly unfinished, usually it's a little bit easier to run electrical lines and mount outlets from your breaker box. The biggest factor on where to put your freeze dryer very well may be power supply. You don't necessarily need a dedicated line for a medium freeze dryer, you do for a large. So we're going to take a look at power supply and what you can do to power your freeze dryer. There's a couple of useful tools you can have to help you determine if you have the adequate power supply for your freeze dryer. One is going to be a clamp meter. Now this is made by Klein Tools. I bought it from Home Depot for about $80. It works well. This is another clamp tool. I bought this one from Harbor Freight for less than $15. It also works well. Another tool that is helpful to have if your breakers are not marked is a tracing tool. Now I believe I got these from Home Depot. I can't remember how much I paid for them, but this is the transmitter. This is plugged into the outlet, and this is the receiver. So you go down to your breaker panel, and when this is turned on, you scan your breaker panels until you get a tone. And that will tell you where your outlet is located, and then you can measure the amount of amps on that particular circuit. I finally decided to put my freeze dryer at the end of a hallway because it's away from a lot of the sleeping quarters. There's no one downstairs underneath this, and it has a dedicated outlet. Now you may not know if you have a dedicated outlet, so we're going to show you how you can find out what amperage draw is on this outlet. So we're going to plug the transmitter in, and you can see it's indicating that it has power going to this outlet. So we're going to go down to the service panel or your breaker box and find out where this is located. This is my service panel. Sorry it's kind of dark down here, but the first thing we need to do is remove the screws around the service panel, being careful not to drop it when we pull the last screw out. Now this is my service panel. I have a total of 30 breakers inside. Now I'm fortunate that the area around my service panel is unfinished, so if I want to pull additional wires I can do it without much of a problem. But we need to discuss a little bit about service panel safety. Don't touch or get near anything that's bare metal. You can see right here we have the neutral in the middle and the two legs on both sides. Those are energized. If you feel uncomfortable with your service panel I suggest you call an electrician. Okay, up here you can see the neutral buses on both sides where the white wires are going to, and back behind here on this side and this side are the ground buses. Just don't touch anything that's bare metal. With that said, we're going to scan for my signal. So we're going to run the receiver down the panels, down on the backs of the breakers I should say, and there we go. So you can see this is where my breaker is. So it's this little guy right here. You may have noticed I have two wires going to this breaker. We'll discuss that in a moment, but it's perfectly legal. But what we're going to do, we're going to isolate these two wires together to measure the amperage being placed on this breaker. So I'm just going to kind of lightly pull some of these wires up to get them a little bit closer together so I can slip this clamp around both of these. Okay, so right now, if I can get this into position and I can turn on the light, right now I'm pulling 4.35 amps off this circuit from upstairs. Okay, according to my panel, that circuit goes to smoke detectors, laundry room lights, upstairs living room lights, stairway lights, and sewer pump outlets, and the hallway lights. So basically these are nothing but a bunch of outlets and lights. So we have identified the breaker, so we can take that out, and my freeze dryer is plugged in. So we're going to come up here to the screen, we're going to press the leaf, and we're going to go ahead and turn on the freezer. We're going to turn on the heater, and we're going to turn on the vacuum pump. So right now everything is running. So back downstairs we go. Okay, with everything running on the freeze dryer, I am now pulling 13.6 amps, and this is going to be a 20 amp breaker, so I'm sitting pretty with what's going on. So this circuit is going to be just fine for a medium freeze dryer. Okay, now what I've done, I've swapped out the Klein with the Harbor Freight clamp, and where I was getting 13.5, I'm getting 13.4. So this little Harbor Freight thing is working just fine. Now, right now, I have a full breaker panel. Like I told you, in some locations, I'm actually running two wires under one breaker. Now, I have a square D HOM service panel. On square D circuit breakers, you are allowed, and if they've been designed, to put two wires under one circuit breaker. If you can look right back in there, you can see that there are two spots for the wires. Now, International Electrical Code does not set the rules. They basically allow the manufacturers to set the rules for their product, and that's why it is legal to allow a square D to put dual wires under their circuit breakers. Now, if you have a full service panel, there's something else you can do. On square Ds, with I believe it's the last 6 slots down here, you can see on this side I have a single 20 amp, but over here I have a tandem 15 amp. So if I want to, I can actually take some of these breakers out and put a tandem breaker in, and I can turn one 20 amp or one 15 amp location into two. So that's a second way you can expand your service panel. The third way you can expand your service panel is you can actually bring a wire into your service panel, disconnect, say, one of the wires go into a breaker, and using a wire nut and an extra wire, you can actually make a junction or a connection within the service panel, bringing two wires into one wire, and then that would go back underneath your circuit breaker. but when in doubt, call your local building department and verify with them. Okay, so we're back at the freeze dryer, and I think it'd be good to show everyone and to calculate how much it costs to do your freeze drying. So we're up here at the home screen, and I have the plug to the freeze dryer plugged into like the world's shortest extension cord. You can see the neutral, the ground, and the hot, and I have my clamp around the hot, and it's on amperage. So right now, with just this home screen, we are pulling 4/100ths of an amp right now. I don't know if this will be any better if I put the highlight up there. So we're hardly pulling anything right now. So we're going to go to the leaf, and we're going to determine how much money we're going to spend. Now, if you remember the cycles of a freeze dryer, the first thing that happens is the freezer turns on. So we're going to go ahead and turn on the freezer. And as you can see, that jumped up briefly to about 34 amps. And that spike voltage, it's just that extra amount of power to get everything rolling, but that's just fine. If it stays up there, that's when there's going to be a problem. But right now, it looks like we're settling down probably, my guess is going to be about 4.5 amps by the time this settles down. Okay, so we're going to let that thing do its thing. So we're hovering right around 4 amps. So this is going to freeze. This is going to cool your vegetables down, probably for about an hour and a half or so. And then when it gets down to negative 40 degrees, the vacuum pump is going to come on. And the vacuum pump's going to do its thing. The heater's going to come on. And the heater's going to heat up all the trays inside to help dry the food out. So right now, we're basically going to be around 12.5 amps to power the freeze dryer, and that's going to happen over the period of 2 to 3 days depending on what you're drying. Now, just for the fun of it, we're going to put the Harbor Freight one on here. So the Klein says 12.5 and the Harbor Freight says 12 1/3. So for all intents and purposes, these things are both working just fine. I'd like to talk to you about pie. Not that kind of pie. And not this kind of pie. But I'd like to talk to you about this kind of pie, which is the formula for watts. P equals I times E, where P equals watts times amperage times voltage. So we know that we have 120 volts coming out of our wall, and our freeze dryer is pulling 12.8 amps, but just for the fun we're going to round that up to 13 amps, which if you times 13 by 120, that comes up to 1,560 watts. Okay. Kilowatts is how we are billed for our power, and so we need to divide 1,560 watts by 1,000 to come up with 1.56 kilowatts. Now, where I live, I am being charged basically 8 cents per kilowatt hour. So if we do the math on that, for every hour that my freeze dryer runs, it's going to cost me 14 cents an hour. So if you think a freeze dryer will run 24 hours to do a batch, and that's kind of conservative, I am now paying per batch $3.36 per batch for power for my freeze dryer. Now that's just the cost of the freeze dryer. Add in the cost of bags or jars or cans and lids, oxygen absorbers, and even maybe freezer time. Your more realistic price is probably going to be a little bit higher than that. I love my freeze dryer. I have no problems with spending the extra $3 every time I do a load. However, there is an unintended consequence in having a freeze dryer, and it may cost you a little bit more money than you think. And that's why I want to talk about BTUs. Now, a BTU is a British thermal unit, and the definition of a BTU is the amount of energy it takes to raise a pound of water 1 degree. So today's quiz is, which has more BTUs, my Harvest Right freeze dryer or a 1500 watt heater? Which could it be? Which has more BTUs? Well, my 1500 watt heater has 439 BTUs. Guess how many BTUs the Harvest Right freeze dryer has? It has 527. So technically, the Harvest Right freeze dryer puts off more heat than my 1500 watt heater. Now, one of the problems I was mentioning about an unintended consequence is this. So I have my Harvest Right freeze dryer at the end of my hallway, and I have my thermostat right here. So one of my problems I'm having is, as my Harvest Right freeze dryer is pumping out all kinds of heat in this kind of contained little hallway, it's messing with my thermostat. So imagine for a minute that you have this heater plugged in, sitting on the floor, and it's running all day. That heater is going to heat up the hallway and give a false reading to my thermostat, which means my heating system or cooling system thinks that it's hotter in this hallway than it should be, and so it's going to run my air conditioning more than it should. More air conditioning, more cost. So one thing to consider about location of your freeze dryer is, will your freeze dryer heat up a room that could have an unintended consequence? Now, when my freeze dryer was out in the garage, it kept my garage nice and warm in the winter time. Well, in the summertime, this puts off enough heat to send the temperature in my garage up too high to where I get that little pesky warning notice that it's over 85 degrees. So something to think about. The other location issue I would like to talk to you about is about noise and how much the freeze dryer will produce in decibels. So right now I have my little handy dandy meter here, and if I'm quiet enough to get a baseline, it is about 40 decibels in my hallway. So what we're going to do, we're going to go ahead and turn on some of these items here. I'm going to go to the leaf. So at a baseline about 43 decibels, we're going to turn on the freezer. So it's around 60 decibels. The next thing we're going to do, turn on the vacuum pump. So right now I'm about 12 inches away from the vacuum pump, as you can see right there, and we are recording about 63 decibels. Now the farther away I go, as I walk back through my hallway, the lesser it's going to be, of course. So one thing you'll need to consider when finding a place for your freeze dryer is a location where the sound won't be troublesome. Now, we talked about sound. What about vibration? This is a really neat little app I use at my work all the time. It measures the Vercelli scale, which is similar to the Richter scale. So if I come up and tap on my freeze dryer, you can see, just for me just barely tapping, what it does to the Vercelli scale. Now, the thing about vibration and why that's important is how much vibration does a freeze dryer give off, and how much of that vibration is going to be transferred through the floor into other areas of your house. Now, when I had my freeze dryer in the garage, I didn't have to worry about that. So once again, let's turn on the freezer. And then we're going to turn on the vacuum pump. So as you can see, this basically almost gives off enough vibration as a weak, consistent earthquake. Now, my little scale is sitting right on top of the door of the freeze dryer, but what if we move it somewhere else? Now my scale is between the freeze dryer and the pump itself, and it's giving off at least 3.3 up to 3.4 units of vibration. Now the scale is on the bottom of my cart, and it's giving off about 2 to 2, almost 3. Now if we take this off the cart and put it on the floor, you can see that we're barely even reaching 1, and that's primarily because of the rubber legs of my cart. So one of the things you might want to consider is the location of your freeze dryer, because it does give off a bit of vibration, and vibration can translate into noise. If you put your freeze dryer on a cart with rubber wheels, the rubber wheels will go a long ways in reducing the vibration into the floor. If you put your freeze dryer on a kitchen counter that is rigid, made out of wood and stone, there's a more likelihood that that vibration is going to transfer from the freeze dryer to the counter, to the floor, and to the rooms below. Before I purchased my cart for my freeze dryer, I kept my freeze dryer in a corner of my kitchen on top of this high-tech pedestal made out of milk carts. But one of the things I did, I placed 2 sheets of polyurethane foam on top of the milk crates with a thin layer board on top. And it was amazing how much vibration was absorbed by this polyurethane foam. If you don't have any polyurethane foam, you can use styrofoam or another material similar like it. For those who are expecting a freeze dryer or still have the packaging material from your freeze dryer, There's 2 big chunks of black polyurethane foam that they use to ship your freeze dryer that you can also use as a dampening material.